So welcome back to Difficult Discussions. We've been discussing about anxiety and left you with the cliffhanger about anxiety-aware managers. So welcome back.
Okay, yeah, I like that. And then maybe let's pull on that thread because, maybe a more traditional leader might have a visceral reaction to anxiety-aware leadership as a term that might have kind of more of the connotations of therapy speak about it. Maybe may even feel like we're mollycoddling people a bit too much. And so if I'm an informed leader, some of the arguments that I hear were actually quite nicely summarized in a couple of works. So Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianov argue in The Coddling of the American Mind, that was released in 2018, that a generational shift in anxiety, particularly among younger workers, is rooted in changes to childhood, parenting culture, and the rise of smartphone-mediated social comparison. And so not workplace conditions. So that's where they're going. And then Johan Hari in Lost Connections, also released the same year, traces rising anxiety, depression, and disconnection from community, meaning, and secure relationships as the forces that are driving higher anxiety in the workplace. So, okay, I'm a manager. I'm told to be more anxiety aware, but the anxiety my team are experiencing is coming from all these other factors before they've even stepped foot in the workplace. And we've seen that in the data that's come through. There's a often cited study by Talker Research that showed that Gen Z and millennial workers coming into the workplace are reaching what they call peak burnout at the age of 25. So they haven't even been in work that long, and they're already reaching kind of peak burnout. Burnout as an umbrella term, inclusive of anxiety as one factor. So that's a full 17 years earlier on average than the average American. So I guess the argument is, surely it can't all be because management practices have slipped that much in a relatively short space of time. How does anxiety-aware leadership solve for all of that?
No, it can't be, I don't think. And I think what you've talked about, that generational piece, I mean, that's a separate conversation, isn't it? Because we're all having that conversation. And I don't think it's quite as clear-cut as we'd like it to be. I think anxiety-aware leadership is not making everything comfortable.
Okay.
It's just enabling people to be capable.
Okay.
And I think being capable, and also to see that I've got some support, and we're not blaming managers and leaders because most of this is unconscious. We're just not aware of what's going on. And to quote the famous Amy Edmondson on psychological safety, we know that whether we use the term psychological safety or simply we're a great team, we're really, we all get on. That's what we used to say, we all get on. And what happens is that people are more willing to have those conversations, are more willing to maybe be a little bit, to use that authentic piece, and again, a challenging, hot word out there. So I think it's saying that if we've got some sort of support and psychological safety, that we do have those conversations, that we maybe name the elephant in the room a little bit more often. And it's the presence of permission to be honest under that work pressure. And that's very different culturally across the globe, different environments. And that is a good challenge. I think it's a very good challenge. But just the permission to be honest, I think that's what maybe anxiety-aware leadership is about, is enabling people to be honest and anxious, say, look, this is not good. I don't feel good.
Yeah. Okay. And so how would you put it to a hard-nosed business leader who doesn't want to hear about
pragmatic?
They don't want to hear about being an anxiety-aware leader. They just want to hear, Stephen, what are some practical things around how I enable all that wonderful stuff that you just said?
Yes, and I think it's not about training us to be anxiety-aware managers, because again, it's not a trainable. This is not a simple thing as that. I think maybe asking some questions to ourselves. So, what am I missing for a start? So. What am I missing here that's going on? Because I can feel something's going on. What am I missing?
And is that a question to themselves or to the team?
I think to both. I think both to ourselves, but also being bold enough. And as you said earlier, do we want to hear the answers? Can we ask the question, what am I missing here, guys? What's going on, actually? Because I notice something is going on. And that leads to the second thing about actually naming the emotional atmosphere, or naming actually people are stressed out, people are overworked, people are not feeling good about what's happening. So I think labeling it and having that discussion, if we can have that discussion. And I think thirdly, it's about something that, because we are all back-to-back meetings. I mean, I was with a group of people last week, and everybody, the day before, they'd all been back-to-back Teams meetings. They hadn't had a half an hour to have a break or get some lunch or anything. And I think the third thing that we don't do is check-in process checking. So in other words, what is making this hard? And that's a bit more pragmatic cognitive. What's making it hard? They haven't got the time to do that. They're all getting pressure from X, Y, or Z. And actually, that's what's making it difficult. You can't keep piling stuff onto people. So I think asking what's making this hard, and we normally only have that conversation when we're in crisis.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's, hang on a minute, what's going on? And yet actually just day to day, if the Gallup report on anxiety and CIPD reports and data on anxiety and stress are to be believed, it's not just when the business is going through stress. It's actually something to make it more of a matter of routine.
Okay. So I can hear the objections coming in from some of our clients, which is, those are three great and nice, simple things to say. What am I missing? What's making this hard? What do we do about leaders who maybe don't have strong emotional intelligence, or maybe a little low on the self-awareness end of the spectrum? We ask them to kind of use these phrases with their teams and with themselves. And we've probably all come across a leader at some point who's been trained to say something, or what am I missing? They say it in a way where they don't want anyone to speak up. And if they do, they'd probably want you to reconsider. So what do we do about the capability challenge there, where emotional intelligence is lower, self-awareness may be low as well?
Well, I think it's a really important question, isn't it? Because emotional intelligence is coming up all the time now, particularly with AI. And we're saying that actually managers need to be emotionally intelligent. We believe that wholeheartedly in the work we do about emotional intelligence. But I think it's, and back to O'Kane's piece around breaking that habit loop, because we get into this, how do we break it? How do we break that? And breaking anxiety, the first thing is to recognize it. And that's in ourselves as managers. Again, easier said than done, because we haven't got time.
Yeah,
I haven't got time to be anxious. But all joking apart, that is the problem. That is absolutely. And I think emotional intelligence is not just simply giving lip service, because human beings are very intelligent. They can read each other very easily. And teams see through it very immediately if somebody's not being, and I hate to use that word, authentic again, because it's had a lot of slack recently. And I agree. I think, what is our authentic self? Can we bring that to work? Not necessarily so. But just being maybe transparent, and actually that's maybe what the emotional intelligence piece is, because teams see through it if we're pretending or giving lip service.
Yeah. And from personal experience, I definitely would agree with that. Maybe if we examine another angle on this topic, we'll bring our old friend the Yerkes-Dodson curve, or as most people know it, the performance stress curve.
Yeah,
so you've got a nice little
challenge,
little curve. Yeah, and so you've got kind of low stress at one end, and then distress or high stress at the other, and you want to be in the middle, the good kind of stress. And there's well-established psychology showing that performance improves with pressure, up to a point, as the curve proves. Optimum, and then suddenly distress. So elite sports teams, they don't optimize for low anxiety, kind of like low stress. They optimize for productive tension, but with clear support structures. And so are we a little bit in danger sometimes of treating all anxiety as pathological and inadvertently designing teams to avoid distress or discomfort of almost any kind at the expense of optimal performance?
Oh, this is interesting, isn't it? Because what we're saying here is there is good stress. And I think psychological safety is not about being comfortable. And I think the word you said earlier was about support. Like in sports teams, it's stressful or there is anxious, but it has support. And I think that's the difference, is that we are supported. And Edmondson said that if people can flag problems, have the conversation, etc., the stress actually is much more manageable, making the anxiety manageable.
Yeah.
So I think anxiety-aware leadership is not just about removing pressure, it's about removing the fear from the pressure. So that stress or pressure, support versus challenge, whatever we want to call it, it's removing that fear so that it feels comfortable. Okay. I mean, I don't know about you, Ben. I've worked in teams, particularly when in my previous years in retail operational, and you have to, rebuild a whole store, and you've got a date when it has to happen, and you're working throughout the night for, you're doing all-nighters for a whole weekend, etc. And I don't know about you, but the energy that on a pressured project, I mean, I remember fondly some of these experiences and some of the best times in my career, where it was incredibly stressful. People were all, having arguments nonstop, etc., and falling out with each other and all the rest of it. And yet there was something about that stress, because, not only you all supported each other, but the manager supported. It was energizing. I don't know if you worked on things like that yourself.
Yeah, I guess.
And we laugh, don't we? Because we think they're so good.
Yeah. I mean, certainly with a Big Four background, stress, pressure, long hours was definitely a common experience. But it was noticeable. The projects where there was something where I could see it would really make a difference were much more energizing. The pressure was welcome because we were doing something that was hard and that was going to move the needle. So those situations were good. There was good stress there, mixed sometimes where it went too far into the bad kind. So I guess is what you're saying that the goal isn't calm, completely stress-free environments where everyone's nicey nice to each other. And there's no disagreements, but one in which is what you're saying, that the anxiety is about the work and not about how the leader is going to react.
Or not reacting, maybe.
Or just not be there. Yeah, okay.
Or not. So I think it's not anxiety. And I think in those experiences that you've had where you've worked on a project and it's energizing, and I think it's not anxiety, it's actually energy. And I think a completely calm environment, if anything, is quite boring. We work with groups of people who say, we're all too polite.
Yep.
And I think that can be a challenge, where we're all too polite, we're dancing around it, but there's not the energy or the permission. And if anything, a very, very calm environment is energy sapping.
Yeah.
It's quite exhausting because you're not getting anything back. And this is not about introvert, extrovert, nothing about that. It's just how do we work together? Yeah. So I think there is a piece there that, as opposed to it being flat and no challenges and no anxiety, it's about how do we react to that? How do I as a manager react to that? And how do I step into it? And that is the challenge, as opposed to being in a tiring, flat environment, so to speak.
Yeah, nice. And so I like that tie between energy and the point you raised earlier around what about the leader's own anxiety? So maybe that's the final string to this difficult discussion. Because one of the most striking findings for me from the Gallup 2026 data was that leaders and managers reported higher stress, more anger, more sadness, more loneliness than individual contributors. So if you're a manager, life is pretty tough, arguably much tougher for managers and leaders than their team members. So they've got all this going on, and yet they're supposed to be aware of everybody else's anxiety at the same time.
We used to say it's lonely at the top,
right?
But it's not just the top. It's actually quite a lonely position. I would completely agree. It can be lonely as a manager. Yeah. And back to Gallup, they found that being a leader or a manager, and I quote, offers little upside in terms of positive emotions. So why would I go for the job? And interesting, I don't know if you've noticed and heard it back as well, is that whilst we're not actually saying that, but also people don't want to apply for those jobs anymore. Yeah. People are saying, actually, I don't want to be a leader and a manager. I'm stuck in the middle. It's more pressure. It's more anxiety. And it's quite lonely. And people are not wanting to progress in what I'd call a classical career move that certainly my generation would have expected it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to the question, okay, so if leaders are likely to be the most anxious people in the room, based on what we've just heard in the data, and we're asking them to be the antidote to everybody else's anxiety. Who looks after the leaders? Is it L&D's job?
Send them on a training course.
Send them on a training course. Is it the exec's job? Or does it need to be another thing that they need to do to look after themselves? It's another thing on their to-do list.
I don't know. I think we jest about sending them on a training course, but actually that's what organisations do. And I think the challenge, it becomes another thing for the leader to put on their to-do list. I need to spend time doing this. I need to spend, and absolutely, it's crucially important, but actually well-being's not just something we just suddenly do and it's developing that habits. And I think as any organisation, it's not the natural thing to do is, let's train people to be more resilient, etc. And I think, I don't know, what do you notice? I think...
well, it's interesting, in a lot of the workshops I'm running at the moment, particularly in professional services, I'm increasingly seeing leaders and managers almost going too far in the other direction. They are putting all of the stress that and discomfort and anxiety that their team are experiencing on their own shoulders. So for them, their working surface is more about, how do I look after me and be aware of, but not over-invested in solving the challenges and the issues that their team are facing. And this links to the research on emotional contagion, of course, which is, when people are unconsciously projecting all of this stress and burden that they're carrying, that reaches out to everybody else in the team, and people unconsciously synchronize to the emotional state of the most powerful person in the room. So that means an unregulated leader who has given too much to everybody else and is worrying too much or filling their own silences, all the things that the Gallup research identified. If they are struggling with all of that, that is going to seep into and create that climate for everybody else. So by caring too much and not having been properly kind of trained, if you like, and knowing when to stop and prioritize themselves, many leaders are making things worse because they're caught in this crossfire of demands. They're getting it upward and downward, and it's making everybody miserable. So, you've got cost-cutting messages, you've got messages that you need to improve morale at the same time, and that's just really difficult to manage.
And I think going back to Elaine Hatfield's work on emotional contagion, in other words, the mood I'm in has an impact on others. And particularly if I'm in the role of manager, supervisor, leader or whatever, people are going to respond to that emotional, even if I'm not conscious of it. So, and I think the challenge is that a leader managing their own anxiety is, I think, reframing it and say that's not self-indulgent. Yeah, if we go back to, in the past, well, do we still see it as self-indulgent?
Yeah.
And it's not, it's actually looking after yourself. We talk about that in proper selfishness, an old concept, but it's important, and it's not about being self-indulgent. It's actually one of the highest leverage leadership acts. If I can look after myself, and we all know that if we're and it's not about being happy clappy, it's about being okay, coming into how do I show up, because I am, I've got a bit of work-life balance, etc. That's where it is so important. Yeah. And we don't have time to do it.
No, we don't.
So, and I think one of the challenges, so how I show up is also that conscious awareness. So I worked with somebody many years ago, and I think this is the thing, it's not about dumping our emotional stuff and I remember the manager phoning me at midnight, and I promise you, I can see myself there. It was midnight, and I got this phone call through. And I suddenly got this ranting of how difficult it was, how stressed out she was. You don't understand how difficult this is for me. You have to get this now. And it was just this tsunami of emotion, which obviously I then naturally enough wanted to do a good job, but that did me no help whatsoever. And I think it's back to that consistency versus unpredictability. And I think it's not about dumping our emotions on others. Say, right, I can't do this, they can do that. And we know that that's not an emotionally intelligent thing. And I know that person was stressed out and it was difficult for them. I know that. But did that solve anything or take the stress away? I think the challenge is that vulnerability, if we think about, and again, a hot topic, if we talk about Brené Brown's vulnerability, it's not about wearing everything on your sleeve.
Right.
I think it's about just being human and saying, look, it is difficult, as I said earlier. I found it genuinely hard this week. I don't know about you folks, but I think we all found it pretty difficult. And actually, let's have that conversation. And I don't know what to do about it.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what the answers are. So I think for me, the word is transparency as opposed to authentic vulnerability.
Okay. Yeah. Nice. So the distinction is it's okay to communicate processed transparency and avoid raw kind of offloading.
Which sounds the most obvious thing.
Yeah. And as you say, some call that kind of selective vulnerability. Cool. So we've covered a lot of ground and raised a lot of tensions that exist around the question of whose responsibility, whose job is it to solve this rising workplace anxiety epidemic, if I can call it that. So where are we with all of this? Well, if I can start with, I think what I'm taking away is organizations have systematically used kind of individual resilience as a way of avoiding confronting structural challenges.
Possibly.
Overwork, under-resourced teams, poor management, all of that kind of goes undressed for years. And it's kind of easier to point the finger at individual resilience. But these things aren't fixed by mindfulness apps, as you said at the beginning. And
I think
there's
help.
more to it than that.
All of this helps.
There are benefits. But framing anxiety as the employee's problem to solve is frankly kind of a failure of leadership at an organizational level, from my perspective.
Yeah, it's controversial. And I think at that level, I think what we have, it's maybe the quality of how we're turning up in those small moments again. It's the human piece, isn't it? And so many people talk about, how do I show up, etc. How do I run a one-to-one? Do I keep putting it off? All that stuff that we talked about actually earlier. So it's thinking what's maybe the highest impact? What can I do? Do I just check in with them, actually have a proper conversation that's not about the pipeline or the work or the milestones? How do I do that? And this is difficult. This is very, very difficult because we are all back to back. We're working 24/7 across the time zones. But yes, I think it's how can I myself as a manager and leader start to impact that environment? Which is not easy.
Yeah. And so, you've already given us some great practical tips on what leaders can do. Just reflecting on this discussion, what's one thing you think would benefit every listener to carry into their week after hearing this?
One thing. I think as much as we've said it's not a sort of plug and play solution, I think maybe questions that we can ask ourselves and, it's even taking the time to think that. So I suppose, what's the signal I'm sending with silence? So by not reacting, what's the signal I'm sending with silence? Could be quite an important one. And this is difficult, but when was the last time I made it genuinely safe for somebody to challenge me? You said earlier, we don't want to hear the answers because we don't want to hear the answers because it's more hassle, it's more anxiety.
I don't have time.
I don't have time for this anxiety. But actually asking the question, when did I make it safe for people to actually have that conversation and create that space? And that anxiously aware leader is and it sounds a bit naff, but actually what's my anxiety doing to the room? What are my emotions doing to the room? Just reflecting for a moment, and that's that sort of checking in with yourself before taking a moment to check in and be in the right space, because if we rock up and we're completely wound up, so I suppose asking those questions, maybe just a little bit of self-reflection, which again is, I don't do it that much because we're all too busy. So it's difficult. It's very, very difficult. So that's, I suppose, my reflection. What about you, Ben? What would you take away from this?
Yeah, for me, it comes back to this discussion around managers not putting too much on their backs. We've raised all of these issues, and it is concerning. But at the same time, it's it's important to recognize that your reactions have a massive impact on everybody else. People are looking at you 10 times more than you're looking at them. So when you show up to a meeting, frazzled, stressed, or distressed, that has an impact on the team around you. So taking the time to prioritize looking after you, and I think we've mentioned this so many times, the not having time piece. I think it's maybe recognizing, if I take one thing away from this, it is actually my emotional contagion probably has a bigger impact than I think, and I need to create more space for me to understand how I'm doing, how I'm showing up. And that might mean delegating more, that might mean negotiating more to create that space, to find ways to make sure that you are prioritizing that as part of your job. So for me, that I think would make a big impact for leaders who are sympathetic to these challenges, but just really struggling to know what to do about it. The first step is find ways to make some space for it.
Interesting. And we're all experiencing it. We're all experiencing it. And I think if you're a leader listening to this and then thinking, actually, somebody needs to be asking me some of these questions, then maybe you're actually already incredibly conscious of it, which is terrific, is great. And it's just admitting it. So I think they're difficult conversations.
They are indeed, yeah. Well, that's it for Difficult Conversations. Thank you for being with us and for our very first episode. If this episode landed well for you, please do share it with a colleague or anyone that you think may need to hear it. If this episode gets enough of a good reception, we may do another one. So let us know in the comments what you'd like us to discuss. I'm feeling like we probably can't avoid talking about AI in some way, shape or form. But tell us what you'd like to hear. And with that, that's ta-ta for now for me.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, everybody.